You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 6th of September 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Vincent McAviney. Coming up on today's programme,
we will use every tool that we have to hold accountable those who facilitate violence, drug trafficking, instability.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken visits Haiti as a UN-backed mission struggles to quell rampant gang violence. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's governing coalition falls apart. What will this mean for upcoming Canadian elections? Then,
all collections now that you will see on the show are sewn to the sounds of sirens.
Ukraine holds its first fashion week since Russia's invasion. Plus, we'll have a business roundup too, as US employment data today could play a key role in the race for the White House. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Vincent McAviney. American Secretary of State Antony Blinken is currently visiting Haiti to reaffirm the US's commitment to a multinational mission to fight gangs in the struggling Caribbean nation and to push for long-awaited general elections. 400 Kenyan police have been deployed to Haiti to lead a UN-backed effort to quell gang violence in the capital, Port-au-Prince. But concerns have grown that they lack the resources for their mission. The US won't send manpower, but Blinken has promised more cash.
The United States is also committed to using this foundation of security to support and unlock the potential of the Haitian people. We're the largest contributor of humanitarian assistance to Haiti. That includes an additional $45 million in humanitarian aid that I'm announcing today, bringing the total U.S. aid to over $210 million this year.
Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Christopher Sabatini, Senior Fellow for Latin America at Chatham House. Christopher, thank you very much for joining us. Firstly, this is quite a rare visit from a diplomat this senior to Haiti. Why now?
He has to basically shore up support internationally. As you mentioned, the resources have not been invested in the country as had been predicted and expected. They're far short of what their goal was. There's also, in terms of financing, they're also far short of what their expectations and goals were in terms of security forces. Only about 400 of the Kenyan police forces have shown up, but there were plans for 2,500 police and security forces to be in Haiti by now, in part coming from West Africa and the Caribbean, and those haven't shown up yet. So he's trying to effectively send a signal that Haiti still has the attention of the United States, despite all of the other problems across the world. But he's also trying to send a signal to the other countries that it's time for them to step up as well. And so he's trying to put a positive spin on this. He's trying to demonstrate that there's been some progress. But the truth is, there hasn't been much progress on the ground, certainly hasn't been in terms of countries stepping up and coughing up both either troops or funding. And so he's simply trying to send a signal, and I'm not sure it's going to work.
There was a lot of controversy in Kenya about the deployment of their police. How has their mission gone so far? You've mentioned already that they don't have the numbers they were expecting.
Well, first of all, they were able to land, so that's a success. There was the airport had been closed because the gangs had taken it over. That's been retaken. They've been able to establish basically a base that had been built by U.S. contractors and U.S. troops. But beyond that, they haven't done much. The security situation, while it's become more calm in Port-au-Prince, is not because the Kenyan police have been able to establish any authority in Port-au-Prince. In fact, if anything, what you're seeing is an ongoing grinding crisis. And just a few days ago, protesters over the security situation took over a power plant and left about 1 million Haitians living in Port-au-Prince, the capital city, without electricity. So there is this turmoil and growing sense of disillusionment with what the international community is doing. And by the same token, as we heard, well, you didn't hear in this, but Blinken has mentioned in the past, is that now the country has to move towards elections next year. And how you can have elections when there's more than 500 100,000 people that have been displaced by this gang violence, and you have more than 5 million people who are facing severe hunger, is really an unanswered question. And again, and I've seen this over and over for past decades, the hope is always by the international community and the United States is that by rushing to elections, somehow you can just sort of pass off this dire crisis. And elections aren't going to do it, nor is even just a temporary international security force, severely underfunded and severely undermanned, going to be able to get there. The question is what comes next, and I didn't hear that from Secretary Blinken.
Well, just before we turn to elections, just on this security force, I mean, my next question was, has there been much of an impact on gang violence? But they've seemingly flown in and then locked themselves down. They haven't got the numbers that they need so far. Will this extra money from the US be able to do anything? Are there any other countries that are offering up troops or police, or will this buy equipment that they can fly in that might help them to get out onto the streets?
So the Defense Department is going to contribute military equipment, which it has. More that will be delivered. State Department the same. But as you said in the report, 45 million is mostly towards humanitarian assistance to address the dire crisis in Haiti because of hunger and poverty and dislocation. So the needs are so many, 309 million, even if you were to add another 45 million, is simply going to be insufficient. And as far as the other countries, first of all, the Kenyans have not devoted the numbers of troops that were originally committed. And the other countries, the truth is they've been missing in action. We simply don't know where they are. It was West African countries who were going to contribute some, as were Caribbean countries. The U.S. didn't want to, although it has some contractors on the ground there and some forces helping build the base for the Kenyans. It's simply sort of fallen off the map in terms of what was originally the crisis. And this is, if you will, to use an American football expression, a Hail Mary pass on the part of Blinken.
Well, it's been another turbulent year politically in Haiti. How is the Transitional Presidential Council faring?
Not so well either. I mean, it took a long time to cobble it together. And they did do a good job of representing different sectors, civil society, business, and they were fortunate and wise enough to not get the usual suspects of the political class, many of which had been involved in corruption and narcotics trafficking and security violations and gang warfare. So they did reach out to a new political class. But according to one report, 3 of those transitional council members are now accused of basically selling jobs in the government in return for support. So even in this transitional council, which was supposed to be relatively pristine and new and fresh, they've been running into the age-old problems. And you've got Gary Conille, who is a well-respected former UN diplomat. He's the acting prime minister. But how much they can deliver in terms of actual security, given it's a collapsed state. In terms of with a Haitian police force that is severely overstretched, there's been huge amounts of defections from the police force. It's going to be in struggle. And again, to get to the point of the elections, how you build a state from the bottom up is, in fact, more important than convening elections.
Yeah, and just finally, briefly on that, I mean, Blinken has said that it's for the Haitian people, not the Haitian gangs, to write the country's future. I mean, the prospect of free and fair elections, could they be at any point in the next year?
I fear the U.S. and the international community is going to rush in that direction. But again, consider if you cannot establish a security force and security throughout the country, there's a real risk in convening parliamentary and presidential elections, which would have to be convened. There's a real risk is that simply those gangs and those illicit forces will then compete in the elections, either by coercing voters to vote for their preferred candidates or even competing them in themselves. And what's important, a number of these gang leaders that came together last year, a number of them have their own political ambitions, including Guy Philippe, former narcotics, well, probably still a narcotics trafficker, but he served time for narcotics trafficking and money laundering. The danger is without security, those elements will find their way into the state.
Christopher Sabatini, thank you very much. Now here's Carlos Arabello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Vincent. The UK will provide Ukraine with 650 new lightweight missiles. The missiles can be launched from land, sea or air and have a range of more than 6 kilometers. It follows Russia's massive missile and drone attack on Ukraine this week. The new supply of missiles is expected to arrive by the end of the year. China has announced it's ending its international adoption program, with exceptions for blood relatives to adopt a child or a stepchild. The US is seeking clarification on how the decision will affect hundreds of American families with pending applications. US families have adopted more than 80,000 children from China, the most from any foreign country. And the Japanese owner of convenience store chain 7-Eleven has rejected a €34 billion takeover bid from the Canadian firm Alimentation Couche-Tard, citing regulatory risks and an undervaluation. 7&I Holdings says it remains open to negotiations for a better offer. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Vincent.
Thanks, Carlotta. It's been a turbulent week in Canadian politics, where the junior coalition partner in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's minority government has pulled the plug on a 2.5-year-old governing deal, sparking the possibility of an early general election in the country. The leader of the New Democrats Party, Jagmeet Singh, made the announcement in a social media post on Wednesday, criticising Trudeau's record in office as he did so. A little earlier, I spoke to Monocle's Toronto correspondent, Thomas Lewis, who began by giving us his reaction to the move.
Well, I think it's fair to say that this has come as a bit of a shock to a lot of people in Canada who are looking on at Canadian politics as parliamentarians prepare in a few days' time to resume their work in Parliament after the summer holidays. It was only a week ago that the populist leader of the Conservative Party in Canada, Pierre Poilievre, made this statement to the press in Ottawa calling on Jagmeet Singh to end his party, the NDP's agreement, governing coalition agreement with Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party, to end that deal and therefore to trigger a general election 1 year early, so to be held in the next few weeks in October. Prime Minister Trudeau doesn't need to dissolve Parliament or to call a general election until October 2025. Now, it's kind of slightly curious that Jagmeet Singh seems to have gone along with that suggestion from Pierre Poilievre of the Conservatives. Lots of it don't really seem to make much political sense.
And why, Thomas, has Jagmeet Singh decided to do this now?
There are several things that are curious about this. Jagmeet Singh, in his announcement that he was bringing this deal to an end, said he was tearing it up using this quite sort of aggressive language, but sort of ignored the fact that, in fact, his party had been effectively a partner in government for about 2 years. And what is curious to a lot of people is that many of the policy priorities for the New Democrats were, in fact, being pushed through into policy and working their way through that pipeline, and many of them haven't been put into law yet, some expecting those to come to fruition early next year. So to terminate this agreement now, before those things have been achieved, seems like an odd bit of political timing, potentially a bit of an own goal, given that the NDP, part of the NDP's platform in any forthcoming election would surely to be that they were able to show what they'd achieved when they had a seat at the top table. But by tearing up this agreement, they potentially aren't going to see many of those policies that they had pushed for, shoulder to shoulder with the governing Liberal Party, come to fruition. So that is a curious part of the move here that I think a lot of people will be scratching their heads over. It isn't entirely clear politically either, another part of the move here by Jagmeet Singh of the New Democratic Party, beyond really putting pressure on Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, because if you look at the opinion polling over the past year or so, it isn't as though the NDP have been sort of soaring in the opinion polls, which you would expect possibly that they would be, given that there is large dissatisfaction with Prime Minister Trudeau and his governing Liberal Party, who are coming up to a decade in power. And Jagmeet Singh, the NDP, haven't really been able to capitalise in opinion polling, at least. And if you look back at the last general election in Canada in 2021, they in fact lost a seat or two in Parliament, and it's not clear that they've turned that around in the years since. So the politics of this move are just kind of slightly baffling in lots of different ways that you look at it. And I'm guessing that the Liberal Party, which is led by Prime Minister Trudeau. Well, they're saying that they don't want to play politics and they want to get on with the job of government, as you would expect them to do. But I think the sense is that this might not be as damaging to them as it might have been, given that quite a lot of what the NDP is saying here doesn't really square with either their own track record or what they hope to happen next, politically speaking, in Canada.
And how have Canada's other political leaders, namely the Prime Minister himself, responded so far?
Now, it's worth noting in response to this move that Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader who had in fact called for this very situation to unfold, has in fact pushed back against Jagmeet Singh, saying that he's playing politics, that it's all a bit of a scam to try and dupe Canadians into thinking one way or the other. So it's all pretty confusing in terms of the political messaging, and not a lot of it, to be honest, is that clear. For his part, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he was asked about this during an official visit, and he replied very calmly, as we can hear now.
As I traveled across the country this summer, people talk to me about making ends meet. They talk to me about the high cost of rent and the need for more housing. They talk to me about the environment and climate change and the impacts of it. And these are the things that we're focused on. I'll let others focus on politics, but I will point out that I really hope the NDP stays focused on how we can deliver for Canadians, as we have over the past years, rather than focusing on politics.
Prime Minister Trudeau there reacting to the news that his junior governing coalition partner, Jagmeet Singh of the New Democratic Party, had withdrawn his support and withdrawn from that deal. Now, what happens next? Well, that's slightly unclear. Many of us felt that should this deal collapse, that an early general election would likely have to be called. That doesn't appear necessarily to be how things might play out. What it does mean, however, is that effectively Justin Trudeau's government, which is a minority government following the election results of the last general election back in 2021, will effectively have to negotiate with the parties for every piece of legislation that they want to get through. Now, the Liberal Party itself is sort of calling out the NDP, saying that they are holding the work of government hostage effectively for their own political gain. So it doesn't mean necessarily that an election is going to happen sooner rather than, when it's scheduled for next year. But it does almost certainly mean that the remaining time in office before the next election, whenever that comes for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government, is going to be far more arduous. And it will be interesting to see what sort of political points in those manoeuvres the other parties in Canada's Parliament want to make.
That was Monocle's Toronto correspondent Thomas Lewis. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You're back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now let's get a roundup of some of the day's business stories with Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. Ewan, lots of attention today on some key economic data which could play into the race for the White House.
Hello, Vincent. Yeah, I hate to use the phrase all eyes on, but a lot of investor eyes and attention will be on the crucial US jobs data coming out in just a couple of hours' time. Now, US interest rates have been on hold at 5.5% for more than a year now, but we're almost certain that the next meeting of the Federal Reserve will see them being cut. The US labour market has been cooling for some time. The reading of this bit of data, it's called the non-farm payrolls number, in July came in at 114,000. That was 114,000 new jobs created in the US economy. That was the second worst reading since the early days of the pandemic. The expectation, the survey for this number is 165,000. So how far it deviates up or down from that will be the key thing to watch. Now, let's be clear, the US is not in a recession. The jobs market is not that bad. When things are bad, of course, the US economy loses jobs. So these are positive readings, but they're much lower than we've seen in the boom days after the pandemic. So the Federal Reserve will be watching this number very, very closely. We know that inflation is looking like it is fairly under control in the US, but the labour market is slowing considerably. So if this number comes in particularly bad, that will really reinforce the case for a jumbo cut in interest rates. So that would be a 0.5 point cut in interest rates at the next meeting. If it comes in a bit less bad than expected, then the Federal Reserve will probably cut interest rates by 0.25 point at its next meeting. But we've had really a whole host of pretty poor data from the US in the last couple of months. There's been a drop in job openings, grim readings from the regional Federal Reserve surveys, and a gloomy beige book report. One sector that's likely to drag on payrolls particularly is construction. We can ascertain this from the gap between housing permits and housing completions. That has been falling sharply since its peak last year. And we know that there tends to be a lag of about 7 months until people start losing their jobs in construction. So we think that's going to start showing through perhaps in this reading we're going to get today. But the Federal Reserve meets on the 18th of September, and that's the meeting where we're expecting that first cut in US interest rates.
And how much will the time of year, obviously August time where lots of people take breaks, sort of come into play on this reading? And also, you kind of get this before a US election. Businesses kind of just hold tight to see what the result is. We've seen Goldman Sachs come out earlier this week saying that Kamala Harris would be a better president for the economy. Is there a bit of just everyone holding their breath?
Yeah, there's been interesting reports actually on what the different candidates are going to do. We've had Trump making a big economic speech just yesterday saying that he plans to cut corporate taxes and some other taxes. Kamala Harris is saying that she'd like to increase the rate of capital gains tax. So we're starting to get some bit of flesh on the bones of their economic programs. You're right to say that it does, in the run-up to elections, there can be a bit of holding of breath in amongst employers in the US. Of course, the election season tends to go on for months and months and months. It does feel this time it's been rather compressed, though, with the change of candidates from the Democrats coming rather late in the day. But it is certainly a time of the election cycle where a lot of employers will just watching and waiting before they make their moves.
And another regulator is raising concerns about Google's dominance.
Yeah, the UK's competition watchdog says that Google is abusing its dominant position in advertising technology. This is a report from the Competition and Markets Authority. It says that the company is using its dominance in tech advertising to prioritise its own services, and that is potentially harming UK publishers and advertisers. Google's algorithms, of course, offer ad space and prices to advertisers as users click through to web pages. But the CMA is concerned about the company's dominance. Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, says the findings are based on flawed interpretations of the ad tech sector, and it's preparing a full response. The problem for Google, though, is online advertising is absolutely the core of its business. Alphabet is the world's fourth most valuable company, and it makes a ton of money from online advertising. 80% of total revenue, generating sales of about $225 billion. So this is a huge business. And the problem for Google and for Alphabet, it's not just the UK regulator which is sniffing around this. Last summer, the European Commission said that tweaks to the way this operates may not be enough to alleviate its concerns about competition, potentially opening the way for it to be forced to separate its ad tech business from its core services, something which would be very, very bad news for Alphabet. And in the US, the company is also set to face the Department of Justice in a trial later this month, in fact, about what the DOJ calls illegal monopolization. So Google really facing these charges on a number of fronts.
Ewan Potts, thank you. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Known for her ethereal, colourful cocktail dresses, Ukrainian designer Nadya Dzyak has joined scores of other designers back in Kyiv for Ukrainian Fashion Week for the first time since Russia's full-scale invasion. She spoke to Monocle's Julia Lassica about the solidarity among the design community and what fashion has come to mean for her nation at a time of war. Julia started by asking Nadya about how she feels being back in the capital during Fashion Week.
For me, it's our mission to use our work to raise awareness about the situation in Ukraine, to share our stories, and to show our rich culture and our heritage. For me, it is a way to show that despite the war, we are strong and we are unbroken. Participating in Ukrainian Fashion Week this year, especially, I want to say that it is the first Fashion Week since the full-scale invasion. It is very important for our team, for our industry, and it is not just fashion event. For us, it's a platform to express, to show our fight. really, because we have a lot of talented designers, and we really want our industry to develop.
Can you tell me about what it means for the fashion community as well? Are you making links that perhaps you might not have made if you were doing these fashion weeks dispersed around the world? What does it mean to come back all together as a community as well?
For us, it's about staying strong, about supporting each other, about demonstrating the world that Ukrainian fashion continue to create, continue to show amazing pieces and believe in our victory. I was surprised that designers support each other. Now all designers look like one team. And that is a very important thing. For example, if we don't have electricity in our studio, we can go to another designer in our studio and use their production. It's unbelievable. It's so important, and it's really very important for fashion industry, for fashion community. For us, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's like a hope, because all collections now that you will see on the show are sewn to the sounds of sirens, to the sound of rockets, without electricity, with the help of generators. And I think we really very talented, very unbreakable. And I think we Ukrainians are a unique nation, really.
And can you tell us also about what it means specifically to be in Ukraine? Lots of designers now are kind of going back to authentic, Ukrainian folk costumes, or they're looking back into Ukraine's 20th century past and beyond, looking at artists, writers, poets. And I was looking at your designs, and they're so beautiful. I think the word you used was ethereal to describe them. Specifically, maybe with the collection that you're showing now in Kyiv, but also generally, has your work been influenced specifically by being rooted in Ukraine, in this country?
For me, very important to stay in Ukraine. And my team, my studio, my production, everything in Ukraine, everything in Dnipro. It's my native city. It's very important to create everything in Ukraine, to feel this, because it's our native team, native city, native Kyiv, native Ukrainian Fashion Week, native journalist. And in this new collection, like in our previous spring-summer, we continue to explore the art of Ukrainian native artist Polina Rayko, whose home museum was destroyed after the Kakhovska Dam was blown by Russians. And yes, the collection is very bright, very optimistic, because it's about our hope. And also new collection about unique natural beauty and cultural heritage of Ukraine. We are focusing in pink lakes of southern Ukraine and the Kinburn Spit. Now, unfortunately, this region currently under the Russian occupation. But we want to say to the world about this. And we want to speak to the world in the language of our creativity, to show our culture, to show our heritage, even when it is a risk of being lost to war. I thought that no one needs our transparent cocktail dresses. But now I know that our clothes, our transparent Nadya Dzyak classic ruffle dresses, I know that they give amazing emotions, they give optimism, they give a hope, they give a part of good optimistic vibes. And I know that our clothes make people happier, and it's our mission.
That was Ukrainian designer Nadya Dzyak in conversation with Monocle's Julia Lassica. And that's all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Laura Kramer, our studio manager was Steph Chungu, and our researcher was Sana Jumani. I'll be back with The Briefing at the same time on Monday. If you've enjoyed the show, please do subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review as well. Let us know what you've enjoyed listening to and what you'd like to hear more of. And you can email me about any topics at vm@monocle.com. I'm Vincent McAviney. Goodbye, and thank you for listening.